All right, so I want to go over Chapter 11. Hopefully you'll see, understand, and appreciate why, after we go through the chapter, you'll see why I'm not testing you on it. Okay? Let me tell you that I got an email today from my counterpart, Evan, in St. Louis. And we talked about the fact that starting next fall, when this class is taught again, it's going to be taught totally differently. We're not going to have this book. It's going to be taught using what's called a model view controller type of setup. All right? Well, Evan decided he's going to start using model view controller this semester. He teaches his classes are taught differently than the ones are here, but he's going to do that. And I probably have shown you this already, but I don't know if I did or not. So I wanted to show you this.
I got it to work.
That's not what I'm looking for. This is it. I think. Okay, again, I may have shown you this already. So he's going through this book that you see right here. If you're interested in it, you can get it for free. Okay, literally, I just Googled it, and it's a free PDF. In my opinion, for whatever it is or is not worth, okay, this book is much, much harder than the stuff you're doing. It's not even close. What you do, by and large, in Model View Controller, it's all code. There's no GUIs. There's nothing GUI, virtually. So you might be like, well, then why would you want to do that? That makes sense, to ask a question like that. Because people who are out in the industry say that people who are coming out of school aren't trained in Model View Controller. And the problem with that is a lot of their own people are not trained in Model View Controller. All right, so there's nobody with a lot of training in it. Model View Controller is another way that it promotes a lot of code reuse. All right, so again, this is called Professional ASP.NET MVC, and if you just come in here and literally Google Professional ASP.NET MVC, I guess it's MVC 5, and you say free PDF. It's the first one that comes up. Okay? And it is a fairly new book, too. You look here. (2014). And in some books that's really old, but MVC 6 is out now, so this is an MVC 5 book. If you knew this stuff, that would do nothing but help you to get a job. All right? That's going to be my summer project. I'm going to try to build something from scratch using MVC. All right. Now, one of the reasons I even mentioned that to you is Chapter 11 of the book, which we're going to talk about right now. Oh boy, come on, stop that. Chapter 11 in the book, as you can see, is entitled How to Work with Friendly URLs and Routing. All right? There's two ways that you can work with friendly URLs. The first way is probably the way you'd prefer, because basically you go to your old buddy, the NuGet package manager, and you add a friendly URLs component, and then you can start using it. But if you do that, you have very little control over how things are set up. All right, it's more regimented. If you want more control, you have to use routing. And if you use routing, that's going to involve coding on your part. So to me, I think this particular chapter is even more difficult than the stuff we're going to be covering soon on databases. I think, again, like I said, in my opinion, you may or may not agree once we start looking at it. But no, this is easier. Okay, that's fine. But they mentioned ASP.NET offers routing features. And what is routing? Okay, basically what it is instead of having a URL with a question mark and a big long query string after it, you take all the stuff that's in the query string and you basically give it a simple name. All right, and you let the system figure out where it is. Does that make sense to everyone? And you might say, that's fine, but why would you care? Well, I'd much rather have to type in a URL / with just a value in it than question mark and a whole bunch of stuff after it, because the chances are I'm going to screw it up. So they say in this chapter we'll talk about the friendly URLs feature, which is the first part of the chapter, and we'll talk about routing. All right. And it's even possible, as they mentioned in the last few pages, you can combine both of them together. All right. Okay, so the first thing that's in here, again, an introduction to friendly URLs. I don't want to sit and read to you. All right. They talk about a friendly URL, and it's one, as it says here, the data that's passed between the pages becomes part of the URL itself. So if you look on the screen here, this is a real simple example. It's the difference between having to type in this and being able to type in this. I think you would all agree that the second one, the one that's now in blue, is easier than the first one. You lose the query string, and this is a simple example where it's just got product ID equal category 1. There could be a lot more things after this. All right. So the benefits are, first of all, search engines like this, because the search engine doesn't have to go through and figure out a query string. Okay? It's basically been mapped or done for it already. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's much easier for human beings to read and remember. All right? So notice, 2 ways to provide friendly URLs, and they're both going to be discussed in here. The first is to install and configure the friendly URLs feature. That's through NuGet, and we'll look at that in just a minute. And the second one is to manually map routes in code. All right? So you've seen this before on more than one occasion. If you look on page 383 in your book, there's the NuGet package manager. And we've gone through there. We've downloaded jQuery through there. We've downloaded Bootstrap through there. All right, but now if you look in the search or in the browse box, they've got now Microsoft.ASP.net.friendly URLs. And it says that, they're installing the first one. If you ask me the difference between those two, all I would tell you is just read the comment there. I don't use this. I'm looking at it this way. We've got X number of days as of Monday, whether you realize it or not, as of Monday of next week, we're a quarter of the way through the class. All right? So I think it's great that in the first quarter of the class, basically, we've done the first 2 sections of the book, because we're slowing it way the heck down so that when we go through section 3 on databases, that's going to take up the majority of the time we have left. All right? So they go through the steps. I'm not going to read this to you. Notice for this package, though, it says you'll be asked to accept licensing terms from Microsoft. Anybody happen to see this? It's really, I'll just say this. I'm starting to sort of pity myself. I'm starting to forget things, which scares the bejeebers out of me. This morning, last night I called my wife, and of course I forgot to plug my phone in. So when I got up this morning, it was basically dead. So I'm like, okay, I'll just bring the charger to work with phone. I bring the charger to work, but I don't bring the phone. Okay, so I'm thinking, well, that's great. So I have to go into Facebook, and I have to message my wife. All right? If you downloaded Facebook's Messenger, I was watching this thing, and it's on Fox News, so it doesn't say anything good about anybody but Republicans, but it was a very good story. And they said that when you download that package on your, whether you realize it or not, you have two cameras, a front camera and a back camera. You are now giving Facebook the ability to look at everything that's in your back camera. They've got proof. They can get your contact list, your call history, your texting history, your download history, everything you've ever done. They can get that stuff now. And you're agreeing to it by putting the package in. So what do? Well, you can uninstall the package. And then it all goes away. But it scared that whatever out of me to read that today. And I don't do anything bad. I don't. I wouldn't care if anybody looked through my history of everything I've ever looked at. I don't care. Now, they mention it here, so they go through the different stuff that's in here. But I do want to go page back to 382. All right, it talks about how to do all this stuff. That's fine. Then it says, the second statement in here sets the auto redirect property of the friendly URL setting to redirect mode.permanent. This is what? Have you ever gone out, I may or may not have shown you this, but believe me, you'll see this a lot next semester. When we go into the Java stuff and we want to look at the Java application program interface, the Java API, well, I'm going to type in java.sun.com. All right, everybody agree that's what I typed in? I hit enter. Is that where I went? I got redirected because java.sun.com is the old name before they were bought by Oracle. That's a permanent redirect that they put in there. But it's still supported because enough people like me still use it. Okay? The reason I'm telling you that is they talk about redirect in here. And that's what they're talking about with redirect. All right? So you've got these friendly URLs, and they're saying there, how do you work with them? On page 385. Okay? It says the table that's at the top here shows how different URLs are handled by a web application that has friendly URLs enabled. In other words, what you're saying is, if you type in this, okay, if that's the URL typed into the browser, it's going to be displayed like this. Hopefully what you notice is in virtually every case except one or two, it's less typing. What you're doing is you are empowering the system, for lack of better words, to say, hey, I'm here, you figure out exactly where I am. And if that still confuses you, look at it this way. Okay? I've got a thing loaded on my phone. You may or may not have heard about it. You may or may not have it. It's called Life 360. And I've got it, and everyone in my family does. And what it does is it basically puts a little stick pin figure of you, and it shows you exactly where you are at any time. So like if my wife drives to, up to Wentzville, I can tell where she is on her drive, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. But the idea is, when we're doing this, what I want to know is where she is. I don't want a detailed history of how she got to where she is. I just want to know where she is. All right? And that's kind of what we're doing here. With friendly URLs, you are making it easier for the user to figure out where they are, because the system is handling a lot of work in the background for the user. I don't know any other way to put it than that. Hopefully that at least makes some sense. All right? Now, if you remember, and they talk about it in here someplace, but whether it's on, there it is, okay? Do you remember what that stands for? The little thing in blue right there, that tilde, that's basically the root of the application. And if the system has to know where you are, it bases it off the root. Back in the days when I started teaching at Blackhawk, I had to teach a lot of DOS. All right? Anybody even know what DOS stands for? No? It's the disk operating system. It's back in the days when everything you did in Windows was non-GUI. Does anybody know why Windows became GUI? Well, because it's easier. No. Because that's what Apple did. That's why they became GUI. I don't care what anybody tells you. That's what it is. That's the reason. So, they mention here, the friendly URL functionality automatically converts a traditional URL to a friendly URL. You don't have to map any routes or do anything other than setting it up as described in the feature. This feature analyzes the segments to determine which ones are parameters and which ones are not. Now, what the heck does that mean? The system looks, and if you've got something like this right here, it looks to see, is there a folder named order? And there is, so it knows that's a folder. And it looks and it says, is there a folder named cat1? There isn't. So that's a parameter. If you have a really long query string, this is going to probably be a little bigger than it's shown right here. But it keeps a list of everything that's parameters. And that's how it builds the stuff for you. And that's what they're talking about in here. What it says, what this can actually do, is this can screw up static resources, stuff that never changes. Stuff like your CSS files, your images, etc. And then they'll tell you how to get around that in just a minute. So when you start working on this stuff, you can create what's called a URL resolver. Okay? URL, Uniform Resource Locator. So the system knows what it is you want to do. So the idea is, if you want to be able to customize this, you're going to have to write code. Everybody hear that? That's why a lot of people are turned off by it. They're like, this is hard enough to understand anyway, and now you tell me I have to write code? You do, unless you're happy to accept the way things are set up for you. So they mention on the bottom of page 386, friendly URLs use a resolver object called WebForm Friendly URL Resolver to determine how it will handle URLs. And it does it in a very straightforward way. And if you want to change it, you have to add code. That's what they're saying. So they show you next, okay, how does that affect this shopping cart app? And they're showing you on page 389, they show you what changes in the ASPX file. And then on 391, maybe more important, they show you what changes in the C# file. So long story long, but just so you know this, there's two main reasons that you would do this. To make it easier for people who are using your site, all right, and to make it more attractive to any search engine that's going through your site. You don't have to do this, but you could come up with a situation if you didn't. If the user has to actually key in some stuff, it might be more work on their part. That's what the author is saying in here. All right. So, say that's all fine and dandy. I don't want to do that. Well, then if you don't want to do that, you probably really don't want to do this, because this is doing it with straight coding. It's not using any NuGet, anything. The advantage of doing it this way is you get to set up how everything is set up on the system. You don't have to worry about file systems, etc. You have to worry about that stuff when you use the friendly URLs. Here, it's not automatic, so as it says, you must code the URL routes that you have. One of the reasons I'm going over this, just so you hear it, is this is a lot of what you do in Model View Controller. Okay? You do a lot of this stuff. So now notice what they have here. If you look at the picture that's on page 393, now you have submenu items. All right, so you've got a menu that says shop, and underneath it you've got view products, place order, and cart. So you're giving the user more variety, for lack of better words. All right, but to get these friendly URLs now, you have to go in and manually do, and it's typically quite a bit of coding. Just a couple things, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. And I started to do the end of chapter exercise, and I'm like, there's no way you guys are going to want to do this unless we take a 4-hour period just to do that exercise. All right, it's very complex. If you screw the code up, everything gets screwed up. And I just thought this really and truly isn't worth it. All right, so they show a chart there on the top of page 395. It says common parameters that you would use for this. I'm not going to run through any of them, but there they are. And you start to see when you look down below, you're starting to write code. This, you're really not going to change your ASPX file very much, but you can have to make major changes to your .cs file. All right. Anytime you see this word right here, this word, this is going to be true when we get into databases too. When you see the word parameters, you know what a parameter is. You know that if you call a method and you pass something into a method, that's a parameter. All right? But if I do this, and I've shown you this in different languages, but if I do something like this, if I write public int add 2, you've seen this kind of thing before. Int n1, int n2. And the whole thing just says return n1 plus n2. This and this are parameters, right? Okay, and if I call that, so if I'm up here in a main, let's say, and I say int x equals 71, int y equals 37, int z equals add 2 x and y. Well, that x becomes n1 and that y becomes n2. You agree with that? Well, if I make it even easier for the user, and instead of giving these values, I let the user enter in 2 numbers, kind of like make a real cheap little calculator that only adds. That means that every time I run this, I could conceivably put different numbers in there, correct? That would mean that these parameters are different every time, correct? The reason I'm telling you that is when you think parameters like that, think that's something that's affected at runtime. So while the program's running, I'm able to change what gets passed in, all right? And that's whether you're talking about route parameters or when we get into databases and we're starting to look at more complex things in databases, you'll be looking at parameters again. But you want to be able to change things at runtime, all right? So how to retrieve a route parameter, you start to see it. This says in here we're going to use a route parameter. That's in our ASPX file, but again, most of the code that you're going to have to change is not going to be in the ASPX file. It's going to be in the C#. And it doesn't look like much because they're not showing everything. This can get very, very complex. All right? Sometimes you need control over some of the stuff, but not over everything. So if you look on 402, they mention that it is possible for you to combine these two and do some stuff using friendly URLs and some other stuff using routing. So you can combine the two of them. And they mention this also on 403 in the description. I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see it there. And I honestly think that's enough for this.